Good evening. I'll call the Town of Sydney Regular Committee of the Whole meeting of Monday, November 18th, 2024 to order. I'm Councillor Sarah Duncan in the chair. To my left, I have Councillors O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul. To my right, Councillors Garnett, Mayor McNeil-Smith, and Councillor Duck. Councillor Richard Novak will be zooming in. We will have other guests online are with Nick Bray Architecture, Brett McIntyre, and Romy Rita, who will be available to answer questions after the presentation by Dean Strongatarm. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not, am I? Close enough. All right. All right, thank you. Does anyone, I will go on then to the territorial acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that the Town of Sydney is located on the traditional Wasanich territories. May we learn to be of good mind as we live and work together with all of our relatives here. Haishka. Now I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda, or does anyone? Okay, moved and seconded. No, any comments, additions? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And we have public participation period is on the agenda. However, we only have the one item. So I think I'll have public participation for only that one item. So I will go past that to approval of the minutes. And we have the regular committee of the whole meeting from October 21st, 2024. I'll look for a motion. Okay, moved and seconded. Any comments or additions? Comments, corrections? Okay, seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Okay, motion carries unanimously. We have no regular presentations. We'll move straight along to the development applications, which will include a presentation from the applicant, public participation, and then we will have the committee do our question and answer. When the applicant is ready, can move to the microphone. Yeah.
Oh, the red. I'm sorry. Oh, gosh. Madam Chair, members of council, my name is Dean Strongatarm. It's a pleasure to be here again this evening. And Mr. Mayor, congratulations on your new appointment. We'd like to give you a brief presentation this evening about the variance application for 2114 Beacon. And I think, as already mentioned, we have a couple of folks on, excuse me, on video, architects. Although the application today is not in terms of the form and character of the development for a development permit application, is actually consideration, an initial consideration of the variance. But also, I should say, in the audience, I have the applicant and owner, Scott Davies, sitting here, and also with me is Tanya Vegwitz, getting close. Who is with Watt Transportation, and so if there is any questions, and she may actually give a little bit of the presentation as it relates to the transportation aspect of the excuse me, of the application. So as I say, I'll try to go through this fairly quickly, and then obviously respond as best we can to any questions that you may have. I think if I do this, am I supposed to point it this way? Oh, point. Context, I think you can see where it is located in terms of Beacon Avenue and its proximity to both. If you kind of take a 50-minute walk from that area, you would be well into the major industrial area of the airport industrial lands, as well as right into the center and heart of downtown Beacon Avenue. So it's close to many, both in terms of proximity to those services, but also in terms of commercial services, recreational services, health and other care facilities. And so this is very much looked as a workforce housing project. I'll mention a bit later, but it is a rental project, so it's a fully rental project, and as I say, it is targeting that workforce housing market. See if this will work again. And just a bit of a close-up, and you can see the site is about 1.23 acres. It's more or less rectangular with a fairly large, it's got about roughly a 210-foot frontage on both Jan Place as well as Beacon Avenue. Although you can see there's a little bit of a jog, so along Beacon Avenue it's a little more street frontage. But again, it's a large site and more or less rectangular, so in terms of development opportunities, it really does lend itself to that and to provide some good site planning and landscape planning along the way. And again, without going into too much details, but as I say, the site is for a 4-story, 136-unit apartment. It consists of both 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, which, as I say, I think is important to note the number, a total of 42 3-bedroom units, all located on the first and second floor, somewhere in the order of 1,200 plus or minus square feet, so sizable units for an apartment for sure. Each one has 2 bathrooms. In fact, sort of the 2 bedrooms. So it really is an interesting mix of approximately 46% 1 bedrooms and the balance are 2 and 3, but predominantly in terms of what I would refer to as family housing, predominantly 3, which is actually, from lots of projects that I've been involved, is actually quite, excuse me, quite unique. And as I mentioned before, these will be rental units. And again, I won't get into detail, but again, 28 of the units, which is actually a requirement in the zone in terms of getting the density of the adaptability. The proposed lot coverage is 3% over, and is one of the variances, 3% over the maximum allowed, but that is largely attributable to the fact that there's a fairly sizable 2.5 meter road dedication along Jan Place and a 2-meter road dedication along Beacon Avenue, and add that up, and if that dedication was not taking place, we would be under the 60% light site coverage. And the only other thing I'd mention is that there has been again, recognizing the walkability of this site, there's been a heavy emphasis, I should say, and perhaps Tanya can speak a little bit to the TDM measures in terms of transportation, but a heavy emphasis on the parking, which you'll see in the underground. And again, I won't belabor this, but again, in terms of, you've read the staff report, and it very much says in terms of the application, it is consistent with both the OCP, and then if we carry on to the next slide. And I would look, in particular, when I look at the last 2 points on the page, where it says that it strongly encourages the creation of larger units on the first 2 stories. So this very much complies with that in terms of the overall site planning and building layout, as well as, and I think most importantly, is the exemption of the development in the village area, which this is referred to as in terms of minimum parking requirements. And I do note just from the planner's report, in which it says that, quote, the proposal aligns with policies that encourage active transportation and modal shifts through the provision of cycling amenities, ground-oriented units, and increased pedestrian connectivity in the West Side area. It addresses policies that support the creation of workforce housing and family-sized units in the West Side. So again, very much in support of the objectives and goals of the West Side plan. Just carrying on, and again, so the site is zoned. We're not asking for a rezoning, not asking for an increase in the amount of density that's permitted under the zoning. But where, as I say, you can see that site coverage request for a 3% increase in site coverage is again largely due to the dedication of road both along of the 2 streets. If it was done by way of statutory right-of-way, which is not what the town wishes, then actually would be under the 60%. Again, this is just a site plan which shows once again on the south side, on the Beacon Avenue side, that's where there is both a road dedication, and what you will see there is a combination of curb, boulevard, sidewalk, which is 2 meters wide, and 2 meters wide actually on both sides of both the Beacon Avenue frontage as well as the John Avenue frontage. Access, again, this is in accordance with the local area plan. His plan is to actually have the access off of Jan Place and not have access off of Beacon Avenue. So once again, that's consistent with that. I think this site plan shows up again as a landscape plan, and I'll just highlight a couple of details when I get to there, but you can see that once again, in terms of the local area plan and the discussions with the planning department, this is looking at that aspect. I only brought this slide up is that I think it's important to realize that while we're asking for a variance in the parking, what we've found to be as important, if not more important, is the size of lockers for both individual bike storage, but also one of the things that is very common in apartment units is the lack of storage space. And while the larger units all have internal storage space within the units, there is never ever enough storage space. So this has been a kind of a key objective of the owner, of the applicant, in terms of providing a lot of usable storage space, one per unit. And so that, as you can see in terms of highlighting the blue, you can see where that is a kind of an important aspect of having the underground parking. And I won't go through this, but once again, you can see the units range for the one units range from roughly 550 square meters, 550 square feet, to, as I say, about 1,200 square feet, quite sizable units, considering the number of them as it relates to all on the first and second floor. And again, this is not a form and character discussion, but perhaps when it goes to the advisory planning, the application, hopefully the council or the committee will approve submitting it, forwarding it to the APC, that we can have a discussion there and also about form and character. But in terms of, if you look at the plans and you look at kind of both the combination of the fenestration and the exterior materials, they very much are consistent with the design guidelines of the local area plan. And as I say, if there's any questions on that later, I'm sure one of the folks from the architects can answer those questions. And again, I only put this one landscape plan on the pack for tonight. There are several other plans that go with it, but I'd only like to highlight that this includes. I don't know whether there's a. Will this do anything if I? Anyway, on the right hand side of the drawing that will be a statutory right-of-way, which will provide for mid-block access between Beacon Avenue and Jan Place. So in the future, as Jan Place redevelops and you want to get access to the closest bus stop and what have you, you will have that through block access, which once again is both an OCP policy as well as in the local area plan. As I say, this drawing doesn't necessarily do full tribute to the work that the landscape architect has put into it. But if you can see here between the two buildings, and you can see there's an interior walkway that actually leads to both a naturalized playground as well as an open place for where there's a barbecue area and seating area. And you can see in orange both as it rates in between the two buildings, but also between the Beacon Avenue and Jan Place in terms of the little orange circles. That's lighting. So I think both internal to that which would be quite an intimate courtyard area, I think it actually could create quite a significant ambience. And as it relates to security in terms of having lighting that lights up that walkway, that public walkway between the two streets, I think is very important. And again, the amenities, importantly, is the mid-block pathway. There is obviously, 100% of all the parking is underground. We're not utilizing the land area for surface parking. There is the road dedication, and what was also said in the planner's report, there is also both at-grade bike wash and bike repair station on the one side, and then there's also a large both inside and outside amenity space as well. And then in addition, there's things like, there's a naturalized play area for children and outside amenity space in terms of barbecues and seating areas for residents. Now there are three fundamental, and I'll go to the third and the second one first. And that is both the setback and lot coverage, and I would just simply refer to the staff report, in which it says, related to site coverage and lot, and it says that staff believes that the requested variances to decrease the minimum permitted setbacks and increase the maximum permitted lot coverage are reasonable. road dedication areas to be taken from the Beacon Avenue West frontage and from the Jan frontage, reduce the depth and the lot, and also reduce the lot area, which is used to determine lot coverage. If the lot coverage was measured based on the lot area prior to dedication, it would meet the bylaw requirements. So once again, I think as also outlined in the staff report, we feel that the variances are certainly acceptable. We've also, there is a, sizable to perhaps what was the historic standards in Sydney, although these reduction in variances are, I've done a lot more in most other municipalities in the region, but it does come with, and part of the local area plan specific talks to TDM measures to actually try to increase or reduce the dependence on a vehicle and increase the use of other transportation methods, whether it's walking, whether it's by bike, and or whether it's by transit. And I think because of this issue is perhaps said report in terms of some discussion, I would just ask if Tanya could just come up and she could actually, Watt was the one that prepared the transportation report and the traffic, and so I just asked her if she could just say a few words. I think it might be of benefit.
Sure. Thank you so much. So the parking study and transportation demand management report, I want to say, was based on other representative sites within Sydney. You're very unique, and so wanted to make sure that that was the case. In terms of the TDM measures, always the best transportation demand measure of all is location, and so certainly the location of this site and the provision of housing there close to jobs and close to services is its first step. It is proposing to have 2 moto cars, and those would include memberships for all of the residents there, would typically come with chargers. Those would be electric moto cars that are there. But not only is that then an amenity for the residents themselves, but that becomes the starting point for building towards the vision of your West Sydney plan in terms of those moto cars would then be available for everyone in that neighborhood as it now and as it continues to evolve. It also includes the additional bike amenities that Dean highlighted, including secure storage space. And one update to that is that actually 100% of those storage spaces would have plugins available to them, because we know that e-bikes are growing in usage, and again that helps access other services within the town. And then it's within 200 meters of a bus stop. So this area is governed by the Peninsula Local Area Transit Plan, which talks about increases to rapid transit out the peninsula, as well as a new frequent transit service within Sydney, and then growing frequency to the local routes that it's served as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. I think we're just about done here. Oh, once again, I realize this is not a form and character development permit application, but I'll just give a few perspectives. And as I say, as the report says, that staff will undertake a comprehensive review of the development permit guidelines in relation to the proposed development prior to proceeding to the APC. So this will come up at the APC level. But once again, I think you can see an attractive exterior appearance. This is obviously on the Beacon frontage. Gives you a sense, and similarly, that's a similar perspective, just from a slightly different angle. And again, from Jan Place, which you can see, obviously, the driveway leading down to the underground parking on the west side of the building. And I think there's, and then there's also just kind of a farther perspective, just looking at what it is imposing that today, recognizing that the local area plan is anticipating over the course of the next numbers of years that you will see all of these homes redeveloped over time. And so while this is the first one in, it's one of, I would think, in terms of the plan and policies and its relationship to both services as well as employment, going to see redevelopment over the course of the next period of time. And I believe that's a thank you. So I want to think what the request is in terms of from the planner's recommendation that we look forward to proceeding to the APC, and I think it was also being forward to BC Transit. So with that, I think that's the close of our presentation, and be happy to try to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. We'll actually move on and see first if there's any Oh, yeah, questions from the audience, and then that kind of helps committee direct their questions later. So this is probably flashing because of something I've pressed, isn't it? Hold on here. Oh, I don't really know how to fix that that from flashing, but
Oh, this.
oh, there we go. If you can hit the button again. There we go. Thank you. So first, I will open up with public participation and see if there's anybody in the audience. So we'll call for a first time. If anybody wants to come forward and ask questions, make comments. Nope, I see 2 people in the audience, so I'm gonna go call the second time. Nobody's come up from under a chair. Third time. All right, thank you. Then I will now go to questions from the committee to the applicant, and I guess I will let committee choose who they want to direct their questions to. See who wants to go first here. All right, everybody has gestured to Councillor Garnett.
Apparently I won the lottery. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, presentation. So I have a few, and I'm assuming others will have some too, so maybe I'll cut halfway through and let you guys have the floor. So you mentioned rental. So just for clarification, you're speaking to both buildings in that sense?
That's correct.
And do you know the length of time that the rental commitment is?
A minimum of 10 years.
Okay.
If there's going to be a covenant, then obviously there'll be some further discussions with
Right.
staff to come back to
Okay.
council.
And would these be market rental, near market, below market? Do you have a construct?
It's
of it?
market rental.
For all of the units?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And as far as the road dedication, you've been mentioned a few times in there, were your designers aware of the road dedications prior to the design of the building?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I guess when I was looking through your letter of rationale and I got to hardships on page 2, I have to be honest, and I did struggle with this a bit. I don't particularly care for the wording. I would have preferred challenges, and this is where I've spoken to the chair a little bit of leeway. And it actually bugged me enough that I picked up my dictionary. So definition: severe suffering or privation, lack of the comforts of necessities of life. So I guess what I'm looking for you, I know it's a bit extreme, but I'm looking for you when you mention in here that it's a hardship, if you could provide clarity in what context it is a hardship.
Relating to the parking?
In relation to the road dedication space and the front setback, in the letter of rationale, it speaks specifically to hardships, those being hardships. So I'm looking for context and clarification as to how that is a hardship.
Well, if the land wasn't taken off us for those dedications, we'd have a bigger site.
Right.
So there'd be no hardship with we wouldn't be asking for any variances.
Okay, I'm still not, I guess maybe I'm not explaining myself that
Sorry.
well. But
If I may, I'm just, before we get too much into the definition
no
of word,
worries.
I just want to make sure that this isn't like a technical form of a document where consultants always submit and they use the wording of hardship. Before, and that it was in fact the applicant.
Yeah,
that
well,
chose
I
it.
didn't write the letter, but
okay.
I
No, I
think-
just went I just want to know for clarities in terms of the overall financial viability. What aspect is it that relates to it being a hardship, other than you have less space to work with? But if it's just that, if it's less space to work
yeah,
with, that's fine.
It's worth.
Okay.
That's right.
That's-
It's less
that's-
space to work with.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
I just wanted context for myself.
Okay.
And staff mentions the interior side yard setbacks in relations to stairwells. Now, in your rationale letter, again, I realize you didn't write it, but it mentions that not only the stairwells, but to provide larger ensuite area in units next to stairwells. So I guess I'm having a little bit of a problem understanding how attainable workforce housing has to have an ensuite. So I understand the stairwells, but I don't understand the ensuite component of it.
Well, it's sort of a nice amenity to have a typically in a 3-bedroom, if you've got 2 kids and 2 other bedrooms, it's kind of nice for the parents to have their own bathroom. And we're just trying to make them as nice as possible for workforce people that are hardworking people that are wanting to come home to have a nice bath or shower.
And that's fair. From my perspective, I view those as luxury items, because that's not certainly how I had my first home.
Yeah.
So I think most people, when they're looking for a home in this context, in this environment we live in, just a bathroom would be great. That's just a perspective that I have,
Okay.
that I carry forward. As far as I was curious as to why there was no consideration, or maybe there was, given to why you wouldn't want to go to a 5th floor, given that you can do that in terms of actual bonus amenities. And then perhaps the building footprint could be less, and you could not even need some of these variances.
Yeah, just for the cost, it costs a lot more for engineering that way, and then we're trying to keep the costs down. And the engineering goes way up, costs go way up. And again, this is supposed to be, we are pitching this as a workforce housing, and that's kind of, we want to keep it affordable.
Okay, thank you for that. And when looking at your underground parking design, I know I'm probably stealing one of Councillor O'Keefe's questions here, but I found it odd with in relation to the accessible parking spaces. Generally, you like to see those in close proximity to entrances, and I noticed that none of the spaces are close to the entrance underground of the Beacon fronting property. Can you explain why they're so much further away?
Unfortunately, the design team's not here tonight, but I could certainly ask that question to them.
Okay.
That could be something that could be looked at, and if it was feasible, we could possibly rearrange that. But there may be a reason, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, because when I look at the design, it's where they are, you would actually have people having to cross potential traffic to get to the other side and then go for quite a distance to the entrance. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of where I would normally expect accessible parking spaces to be located.
That's something we can definitely take a look at. That's
Okay.
a good idea.
And I have some more, but I'll leave it for others and I'll turn the floor over. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So one of my first questions was, who is this being targeted at? So it sounds like it's workforce housing, which is great. And I'm wondering, you know that Sydney is a mecca for retirees across the country. And so knowing that this is an important, workforce housing is an important need for us here, that's what you're targeting. Had you planned any thing in your marketing in terms of how you would tap into the workforce rather than just attracting more people from the prairies in Ontario to come in and move here? So in terms of the marketing and in terms of how you're designing the buildings.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. So I guess it's, is the whole building or the whole project meant to be for workforce housing?
Oh, no, I'm not. I don't anticipate that, but you know, you can't necessarily control that. But
Yeah.
my understanding from the way you're presenting this, you're tapping into our need that's in our Westlap or OCP zoning bylaw, and there in some cases there's been developments. Those ones I believe had an affordable housing component, but where we made a point of trying to market or give first dibs to the community, people who worked in Sydney. So I'm just wondering, Sydney or North Saanich, whether you had given any thought on how you might do that to attract the type of audience that you're pitching.
Well, 20% of the units are adaptable units, and I think we've got more than enough 3-bedrooms than what's currently asked for in the what's their percentage? Do you know? 33% 3-bedrooms. So for families and stuff that potentially live in Sydney.
Yeah, no, I guess, sorry, I'm probably not explaining myself very well. In terms of your marketing, like any particular strategy you're going to employ to ensure that, or to try and get the people that we want. So people who are maybe employed on the west side already, or currently working in Sydney or North Saanich. Any thought given
Well,
to that?
that would be something, if this development proceeds and gets approved, that would be something that we'd consider once we get to building the buildings, about the marketing. We'd
Okay,
focus
so-
on marketing then,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, that's fine for now. What else is on? So in regards to the parking study, so it's a significant variance, and so I'll just say right off the bat that it's something I will have difficulty with, because I'm not, although Councillor Garnett asked a few questions, I'm not really seeing the justification for that. In regards to, and I look at the development that was proposed for down the road at 2180. And so for that development, they had 140 units. Dean would know, because he worked on that one as well. And they came back and they provided the full allotment for housing and some additional spaces. And they didn't have any difficulty doing that. They didn't ask for variances. And so I guess in terms of trying to be fair to all developers, you know, what is it that's different about this development than 2180 that would convince us to give such a significant variance?
Probably, yes. I might be better at answering that then.
Okay.
So yeah, the other one was 141 units.
Right.
It was a much larger site, and partly because of the awkwardness of the site, it wasn't, if you recall at the outset, this is more or less a rectangular, almost a square site. So, with 2180, more than 50% of the parking, or about 50% of the parking, is at grade on ground, and the only area where there's underground parking was actually underneath the footprint of the building. And as a consequence of that, that makes the parking, the above ground parking is a lot less expensive than underground parking, and yet to achieve the objective in the Oakland plan and this project in terms of having 100% underground parking, which is expensive. So that's partially the difference, just in terms of cost, which Mr. Davies spoke to earlier about why 4 stories, but also, of course, the 5th story that brings other conditions and requirements under the under the local area plan with respect to affordable housing component. And I must say, the other half of what I do mostly is do pro formas, and so I do know that in terms of rental housing and making numbers work, it is a bit of a challenge. And so as a consequence, in terms of this project, that there's a full level of underground parking. Could a couple of more stalls be it could be included underground rather than what is the current site plan? It is possible, but once again, there was a very conscious effort to ensure that each unit had, you know, a large storage space in the basement, and as a consequence, so that each one could have its own plug-in, so each one person could have their own electric bike, and they don't all have to be. So there, and again, it's a trade-off just in terms of what that policy objective is. It's in the local area plan with for West Side local, as it relates to looking for transportation alternatives. Hence the reason for, as I say, the report from Watt, which then identifies what they expected demand was, and then in terms of when you look at every transportation demand thing that's employed or incorporated, for example, that then reduces demand. And there's, you know, again, Tanya can speak to this much better than me, but so there's a whole protocol in terms of looking at implementing this transportation demand measure. It will reduce demand by this much. Implementing this, it will reduce demand by this much. And so that was all part of Tanya's assessment in preparing their report, which was submitted also at the time of application. I'm not sure if that's totally answered your question, but hopefully a bit.
Thank you for the response.
Okay.
Since we're on the topic of the TDM, the demand study, I'll pop some questions to Tent on that. So in terms of, you know, I get the point about trying to get people to use other methods of transportation. However, I'm wondering, you know, the study makes reference to things like the site is close proximity, you know, to parks and recreation and schools and that sort of thing. But do they factor into those studies the fact that to get to those things, children or families have to cross a highway that is the second highest accident-prone intersection on the Saanich Peninsula? We just got a report from the RCMP last week about that. And so how does that sort of thing factor into these calculations, or is it just that Google shows that, you know, as a crow flies, you're in close proximity to things? So if you could elaborate a bit more on how things like that are factored in.
Right. So you're speaking to the walk score and through the chairs, through looking at the walk score. I believe that is taking that somewhat into account. It's mainly distance-based, though. You're right. And so when it is thinking about crossing a highway, that is a factor. Also, though, when you think about the mix of people that could be living there and the range of reasons why people may be traveling back and forth, there's a range of different folks and in terms of what they're going to feel comfortable with as well. So there are 3-bedroom homes, dwellings, units in here. There's also single bedroom units as well. And so you're going to just have a mix of people. So.
Okay. And I guess also in regards to the walk score or those different scores, I note that they say things like it's in close proximity to the airport.
Yeah.
You know, whoever does that calculation obviously doesn't know that, yes, there is airport-owned land across the street, but the airport is a significant difference.
Yeah.
Other things that kind of popped out at me, which makes it difficult for me to put a whole lot of stock in that study, are things like close proximity to parks such as Swiftsure and Bevan Park. So I don't know if you know those parks, but they're really not parks. They're not a park that a family would or anybody would go to. It's a little bit of green space. I think one of them might have a picnic bench. So, you know, so when I look at those sorts of things, it's difficult to kind of put a whole lot of focus on what comes out of that study. So just some comments. You can respond if
Maybe what I was going to say is that we use walk score as a way of screening out the representative sites, right? Because you can, and this one is an interesting one because it's sort of first on the block in terms of building out more of the development and housing within the West Sydney area. So trying to take close sites as best as we can and have it be similar. That's what we're going for when we're looking to see, okay, when we take these into account and try to find similar places, this is what we can see is happening when we're looking at estimating the demand.
I was just going to, sorry, to your point about parks, and I think one of the things, again, that the local area plan identifies is the lack of parks on this side, and in fact, of course, there is a DCC related to parks contribution for the acquisition of land on this side, and so while there's not a site that I'm aware of, looking at Allison, that's been identified, but again, there's a recognition in the plan, and there's a recognized strategy to achieve that, which includes a contribution by every project towards that. That would be just in terms of parks and proximity to this particular site, and is one thing. And then the other thing I guess I would say, just without, at the risk of perhaps sounding a little facetious, but when you mentioned that the intersection of Beacon and the highway has a high incidence of accidents, I don't think but by encouraging people to walk rather than suggesting they really should be driving their car is simply going to add to the amount of traffic and the volume with the, so it sort of is a double-edged sword, and I think if you don't try to encourage folks to look at different ways of doing things than what perhaps you and I have done, and if if I was under 40, I know many people under 40 have a completely different mindset in terms of how they deal with transit and transportation, and many people I know who are under 40, they use alternate methods and don't have their own cars. So it is something that I think is a generational thing, in part at least, and that needs to be something that should be taken into consideration.
Okay, thanks. Just one more. I'll leave the parking issue for now. Just I'm just curious more. It's like a process issue, and it's more a curiosity thing. But as you know, we had to implement new legislation from the province, and prior to that legislation, this property was not zoned for multifamily. It was in our OCP, but we were required by the government to pre-zone that. And part of my understanding of it is by us doing that, we're saving developers money, we're saving them time. They can, not having to go through that process. So I'm just curious from developers' perspective, whether this, having pre-zoned this saves you time, saves you money,
Well, this wasn't part of Bill 44. Bill 44 was for all the residential properties. So this
No.
was rezoned for multifamily. It had nothing to do with Bill 44.
I'm not talking about the small I'm talking about the requirement, is my understanding is that if there was, we had to pre-zone, so if there was lands in our OCP that were designated for multifamily, but we hadn't zoned it that we had to go ahead and pre-zone.
That's not my understanding of it.
Okay. That's fine.
We can save that question for clarification for staff maybe
Sure,
later.
okay. I'll leave it there for
But,
my,
but I just wanted to say one more thing about parking. I mean, the average cost of having a car a year is about $10,000. Renters might not be able to afford that. I've just finished a building on Oakville Avenue in Sydney. We've closed on 24 deals now, and I counted 10 cars in the parking lot. That is, that's less than half of the amount of units that we closed on. I don't know if everybody, maybe some people are out or whatever, but yeah, and that was at night, late at night. So not everybody has a car. And some people like taking the bus, some people like riding a bike, some people like walking. There's lots of good jobs, really good jobs are on this location. Amazon, I'm sure you know all of them. Viking Air, the ferries, the airport, Thrifty Foods distribution, Slug distribution, Scotty Plastics. So people could ride their bike to work. They could walk to work. So not everybody has to have a car.
okay, thanks for
Yep,
that.
thank you.
No, thank you. I've seen Councillor Novak for a while, and then Councillor Rintoul after Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was about parking. I tend to echo Councillor O'Keefe's concerns. I read the parking study. I read all the justification for it. I've heard what the developers and representatives have had to say about that, but I'm not convinced that a property like this, which is supposedly going to attract...
I'm
Point
just
of
going to
order?
interject. Thank you. I would, at this time, can we just make sure we home in on the question for the developer first, and say some of it sounds a little bit more like it'll tilt into our discussion we have afterwards. But thanks.
Well, I'm kind of creating a preamble for it because I'm concerned that all the justification isn't going
Point
to
of order.
stand up. So my question
Sorry.
is,
Thank you.
if council decides not to approve the parking variance, how will you meet that zoning requirement?
That's a question for me.
For anybody who can answer it. Unfortunately, I can't see who's there.
Well,
So-
then, I would say Sydney's missed out on a huge opportunity for workforce housing then, which is a huge need for this community. There's a massive problem with it. There's every time, well, a lot of times when I open up a newspaper in Sydney, it talks about how are you gonna lose all these jobs or employees for all the jobs out here. So, like I said, not everybody has a car, not everybody needs a
I'm
car.
sorry, if I may, I think what Councillor Novak is asking, if you don't get this variance,
Yeah,
the project loses viability. Is
Yeah.
this what you're
Yes.
answering? Thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry, Councillor
So
Novak, was that your
if that-
question
And
accurately?
my follow-up would be, does that mean you're gonna leave the lot vacant?
so, sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So if the variance for parking isn't granted, does that mean that lot will remain vacant?
Oh, no, it would probably be less density on the site. You'd have a lot less units and probably not as good an attractive as a building. Like maybe half of it might be a parking lot and half of it might be a building. Because
But
that
you'd
would be,
find a way to meet the zoning requirements.
oh, I'm sure we'd have to look into it, but that, I don't know what would happen, but I mean, definitely something's gonna happen with the project, with the property. But if the variance wasn't granted, then, it would be back to the drawing board.
Thank you very much. That was my question.
Thank you. I'll go on to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Engagement with your neighbors, what have discussions been like, or what's that process look like to date?
Most of the neighbors have been in mixed reviews, I would say.
What have your efforts been like to have those conversations or to engage with neighbors?
Just with the direct neighbors, we've talked to them about it, and people just, when we've been on site, we didn't think it was didn't know it was a requirement for the variance, be talking to the neighbors about it. The site is zoned, so we thought we'd see how this meeting went before we started doing community engagement.
Okay, what was the rationale for the, I guess I'll call it advertising or the promotion of the building that went out recently?
Sorry, the which?
Rationale.
For
Have I not seen either on social media or in print promotion of this project?
they did an interview for me for my other project on Oakville, and they asked if I had any other projects in Sydney, and I did mention this one. I wasn't trying to promote it in any way, shape,
Okay,
or form.
so it wasn't part of engagement options
No.
with the neighbors and trying to
No,
smooth the waters for their level
no,
of
no,
understanding?
it was simply that the meat and potatoes of that article was about the project on Oakville Avenue, and that's exactly what happened. Is that they asked if what else I was doing in Sydney, so we talked about that, about this Tempo project.
Okay. Thank you. I take your answer to previous questions with respect to the variance requested for parking, at face value, that you recognize there's a community that don't drive. But you compared it to Oakville, and I don't know that they're as comparable in a sense with the convenient location of Oakville, walking to grocery stores. Yeah, you can walk from here to grocery stores, etc. But it is a concern of mine as well. I'll acknowledge the scenario with parking. Again, your target is individuals who work, in the community. A lot of 3-bedroom units, which is commendable, but I take it the target then is for people with families. I don't know what it looks like, to take my daughter to hockey practice at Panorama on the bus from here. I don't know how practical that is. Watt might know the answer to that. But for those reasons, perhaps concerned with the parking scenario as well. So I'll leave my comment there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll look for other first-time speakers. Questions? Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm going to begin by requesting, going to the slide in the presentation, The first one that shows landscaping, I think it's called site plan. It's called site plan. The landscaping one is smaller. Yeah, that one. So in the, this was included in our council package as well as the presentation. And there is writing on the drawing that shows what the existing property line is and what the property line is after the roadway dedications. And so, for example, on the bottom of this drawing, the current property line is the lower of the shaded gray
That's
area.
right. Because it's a 2-meter wide sidewalk, so
Yeah.
that's a 2 meters on that side.
And then with the 2.5 meter, that's Beacon Avenue West, it's 2.5 meters on that side. It's, the upper line is would be the new property line after the road dedication.
Correct.
So, we know that below the new property line is town right-of-way, is boulevard space. And if we go to the top of the drawing on Jean Place, that's similar to the situation. So what we see in green with the colored trees is town right-of-way and is boulevard
Correct.
as well.
Correct.
The OCP and the West Side Local Area Plan speak to the need for the road dedication, hence it's in the West Lab plan for uses that may include otherwise than boulevard, than treed boulevard. So, for example, on John Place today, if you have a car parked on either side of the road, and the Watt parking study indicates how many parking spaces, it says there's 24 parking spaces on the either side of the road, creating 48 parking spaces. You can't get two cars can't pass each other. And so if we're going to densify quite substantially, that has implications. I'll leave that to my comments later. My question is, my preference would be to see the site plan, not the municipal right-of-ways, because we may be doing otherwise with what is there, and I think it's to some degree a misrepresentation, because it's not. We haven't required it, unless I'm corrected by staff. We haven't requested of the applicant at this time that landscaping, as we're seeing on either side, is provided.
It's not I'm sorry, sir, not required to be provided, is that my?
So the town right-of-way
Yeah,
on Beacon Avenue West, below the property line, and the town right-of-way above the property line, the town to this point has not requested of the applicant to landscape in this manner.
That is correct. I can speak.
okay.
The application's for everything inside the property lines, not outside the property lines. Yeah.
So, in presenting to presenting to committee, to presenting to council, in presenting to the advisory planning committee, I think it's important to have an accurate representation of what the proposal involves. And the proposal is what is on the property. Because those right-of-ways may be used otherwise than that. So,
Well, we were just trying to, we did ask for that information, and nobody's given it to us yet, because that, obviously, I suppose engineering wants to see how far this gets before you and us as well, before you start spending a whole pile of money on civil drawings for boulevards and stuff. But yeah, this application is meant to be just for everything outside of or inside of the property lines, but they did give us some direction on what they'd ask for dedications, and they gave us some direction of what they'd ask for sidewalks. So, yeah, we're just in the presentation. Yeah, you're probably right. They shouldn't have put the boulevard trees and stuff in there. But I think that was actually maybe on the comments from the DRC committee. I'd have to check, but I think there was some talk about street lighting and some comments that maybe that's what the landscape architect was trying to illustrate there.
Okay, but staff have indicated to this point that what we see is in the shaded gray color at either end, just outside the property lines, would be sidewalks?
Just outside the property lines would be sidewalks, that's correct. And we did have some direction from staff on that.
I will actually turn to staff. I've seen Ms. Verhagen's hand.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mayor McNeil Smith, anything beyond the property line, which in this case would be that interior road, new line of road dedication, would be determined in terms of how it's finished, whether it's curb, gutter, sidewalk, bike lane, boulevard tree. All that would be reviewed through the applicant's civil engineer and the town's engineering staff and set before a building permit is issued. So that's not part of this development permit application.
Thank you. I do have ongoing questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
If we could then go to the last slide, I think, or is it, yeah, the last slide. The thank you slide. So again, representation for me is important, and we're looking, this is the frontage on Beacon Avenue West. If I'm correct?
That's
If
correct.
we go 2 slides
That-
previous, it's the
that's
same
correct.
slide.
Yeah.
So the sidewalk is not shown here. That is requested. I'm understanding that the larger green trees closest to the roadway is actually the boulevard that, or the town right-of-way that I was speaking to. Sorry, if you can go back to the previous slide, there was another point I meant to confirm. The previous slide we were on that I'd requested.
The one,
Sorry, the previous slide that I had requested, yeah.
oh, the site plan.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, I'll just take the bottom for an example. So we see the colored trees, or we see the building, and then we see what I believe to be the patio spaces for the ground floor units. Is that what those gray shaded areas are?
Yes.
Okay, so now if we could go to, and same on the top. So now if we could go to, so we can see the proximity of those shaded patio spaces to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So if we could then go to that last slide. So in terms of representation, the sidewalk isn't there. And while that looks very, very nice, the sidewalk's not there and not
Oh.
really representing the,
It's sidewalks right here.
sorry?
Sidewalks right here.
I don't think so.
I can see it. I believe them. There's a curb. It is blending in, but you can see the pattern change up by the.
I think it's, I mean, this isn't supposed to be a photorealistic image, and it's supposed to represent what the building may look like, but it's not going to look exactly like that. And that's, I think, the point of all these meetings and stuff, and for the design panelists have to make comments or suggestions and stuff. But there's a curb. It starts right here and goes all the way all on down here. That's the person walking is on the sidewalk.
Well, that doesn't jive with the previous photo that shows the proximity of the patios to the sidewalk.
I haven't measured it,
So
but
I appreciate that this elevation drawing is and Mr. Strongham did say that while form and character is certainly going to be reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission, and this is some representation of the form and character, I still think it's important to have accurate representation. Those trees may not be there that we see on the immediate roadway. And we're not seeing the sidewalk, just feet away from, a few feet away from what the patios will be. And so I think representation is important, but you've clarified in terms of the property lines and the boulevards from the previous. I'll leave my questions on that there. My second question, or set of questions, are my first, another question is indicating that it'll be rental for a minimum of 10 years. So you will be strouting the units then?
no. But we're gonna make a commitment to maybe who knows what happens in the future, but we're gonna commit to a 10-year rental.
Okay. Appreciate that. So my next questions are with regards to the Watt traffic study. And if we could go to one of the first slides, that is the aerial photograph showing John Place and Schuyler. This photograph, thank you. So in I think it's in the Watt study on page 17. It indicates that there are 48 parking spaces on John Place. So we can see the length of that there. It indicates that there is 19 parking spaces on Gallerin. I'm not sure exactly, maybe that's from Beacon Avenue West all the way to Skylark. And then on Skylark it indicates that there's 49 parking spaces on that residential street. My question is to Watt, is knowing the density that is in West Lap adjacent to the proposed development, and knowing the density that is on the north side of John Place and the south side of Schuyler, which is less than the development that we're seeing, but knowing that this is the first of higher density development in that area, how we can allocate the 49 parking spaces on Schuyler Place to visitor parking or residential parking for this particular development. I mean, part of the rationale in this study is that this parking is available to offset the variance that is being requested.
So, through the chair, so the TDM measures are primarily for residents. So it was 14 spaces for visitor parking that was looking at potentially using some of the space that's available right now on street. So that's for the visitor parking. The TDM measures would reduce based on demand that we've seen in other places, but then through putting in the TDM measures, that's what is being used to reduce down the resident demand to meet the underground parking. So if there's looking at the parking counts that were done, if it was the max capacity that was observed, and there was quite a bit of capacity that was observed there, you could put those 14 projected visitor cars, if they all arrived at the same time, you would still have 85 open spaces on street. And I understand that it's the first development in the area, and so things may change, but it's a pretty substantial current capacity.
So in Watt's professional experience, in terms of considering these calculated 14 visitor parking spaces,
Yeah.
you're in essence taking a radius from the proposed development, and that would include the Skylark Lane as being feasible.
Potentially feasible, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does the study, I have a couple more questions.
Yep.
Does the study take into account, in terms of traffic demand management, in terms of parking need and related to traffic demand management, the much higher proportion of 3-bedroom units than we would normally see in this development?
Yes, it does. So there's research that's been done in terms of, okay, the amount of parking demand in a condo building versus a rental building, and then affordable versus non-affordable. That doesn't apply here, but also based on the size of unit as well. And so the demand study did take into account the composition in terms of the number of units and size. So typically there is more demand for a parking space and a larger unit, but the reverse is true as well.
Thank you. The letter of rationale indicates that the moto may be on-site or off-site. If it was on-site, there would be a loss of 2 more parking spaces?
Presumably, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
there's a parking study. So when Watt did the, what I call the corridor study from the intersection along Beacon Avenue West and McDonald Park Road, all the way till it comes to the highway again and down Mills Road, what it did is it took into account the potential development, in particular on airport lands, in terms of the traffic demand that might be created as a result of development. Knowing to my earlier question that I started on with regards to Watt being aware of what the density that the town of Sydney has zoned those between Beacon Avenue West and John Place, and the lower density between John Place and Skylark Place. You believe that was taken, that density was taken, higher density was taken into account in believing that the visitor spaces could be accommodated in that radius.
Do you mean for a traffic impact assessment? Was there one done? Yeah. So the traffic impact assessment would have taken into account the future projected land uses. Yes. The survey that was done in terms of just counting out the actual usage right now, that is looking at what the available space is currently.
Thank you. My last question is with regards to the storage unit. It looks like a lot of storage space in that parkade, in that space there. I'm not sure how to phrase the question, but in the experience of development, it seems to me that that's taking up that storage space is taking up a lot of parking space, and I don't know how much storage space that is per unit, but when it's described, I'm forgetting the number, but it's a significant number of 3-bedroom units, and they're up to 1,200 square feet. The need for all of that storage space in what otherwise would be parking space.
Storage is typically a big thing with people. I live in a condo and I've got a small storage locker, and it's full, chock-a-block full. So is every other one in there. And in a rental building, you don't want the people bringing bikes through the hallways and beating up all the doors and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a nice place to keep the bikes downstairs with all the cars. And the bike storage sizes are specified by Sydney, and we've just gone by the specifications that Sydney gave to us for bikes to be stored in storage lockers.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't expand that drawing on my computer when I was looking at it, but the blue storage spaces that we see there, part of that is for cycling?
So Sydney's got
No, I understand the Sydney bicycle parking requirement.
Yeah.
There's a table in the staff report.
Yeah, but if you keep a bike in a storage locker, the storage locker's got to be a specific size, and that's in the bylaw as well. And that's what we've designed those lockers to be. That's why they're that big.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Relative to this diagram, and just, you mentioned in your presentation that there would be 2 potential moto rental or moto car share opportunities, and subsequently you've said that they may be located here. Where do you foresee those being located in this building?
Those are to be located off-site, on the street.
On the street,
Yeah.
okay. And that's depending on the fact that there's available on-street parking, correct? You would be seeking...
Well, I think when municipalities request, or when motos come into municipalities, they sometimes, I've seen in downtown Victoria, I've seen it, they've got moto parking on the street, so it's specifically for that. So hopefully we could negotiate with Sydney for something like that.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be clear, because you would have to seek that designation of those parking spots. And it makes it clear also, because you've indicated in your presentation that this would be motos would be accessible for the neighborhood as well. So they couldn't be parked underneath. They'd have to be parked outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Further to this, you mentioned in your presentation that the storage units would all have plug-ins for the potential bike charging.
Yes.
Have you followed up with our fire chief or with precautions relative to having batteries charging in storage spaces?
Well, I've just built a building that we've done the same thing on, and it didn't come up in any of the multitude of inspections we had on that building, so
Okay.
I would assume it's okay.
Okay, be something to follow up, because I know that there's been a number of stratas that are now looking at battery management and having battery management centers separate from storage units.
Yeah, okay.
If we could go back to the overview site location plan, that would be great, please. Oh, location, yeah. Thanks, Dean. Just further to the mayor's point about representation, I think it would be valuable, because you've talked about this being the first large multifamily development on the site, and yet there's one that's directly to the right-hand side there, the large forested triangle that is now an approved application, approved development there, that would be valuable, as well as across the street the hotel development and the existence of the traffic circle. I think it'd be valuable as you move forward to show true representation of what exists there or is going to exist very quickly, in terms of like the traffic circle's already built, the hotel's under construction, and the other one's going to be there, just to give a better sense of what is there and the new right-of-way or traffic plan for the streets. I think it would be good to show what is coming into that area, because that does impact traffic, does impact parking, does impact the transportation plan for the area.
Yeah, oh, I agree, but these are the only photos I think available from satellite right now. You get them off the internet or whatever. So as those become available, we could certainly update those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will ask my questions for the first time, and I understand there are follow-up questions from others on the committee. So I think you've answered about the 2 bedrooms. I guess, has your team seen the Town of Sydney Housing Needs Assessment? It's unfortunate for you that we only saw it last week, so.
No, I don't think I've seen it.
Okay, I think that would be helpful for you if this should go to APC to have a look at that.
No, for sure.
Oh, Scott got that one. Let's see. So the parking spaces that would be on site, how would they be allotted, on a first come, first serve? Or are they like an additional payment for renters who would be there?
We would have to, that's something that we will, again, this isn't approved, so we haven't thought about that. Well, we've probably thought about it, but we haven't decided on how that's going to be implemented yet. But I'm sure that's a great question, and something that definitely will happen if this were to be approved.
Okay, I guess this one will be for Watt. A question for Watt.
Okay.
So first of all, I learned a lot from the study about, like, how somebody's finally answered the question to me about how many people ride, on a given moto, and things like that. But I see a lot of Vancouver numbers, probably because they have so many cars there. Do you have access to how many people are using on average each of the 3 cars that are in Sydney? If it's within that ballpark, or or maybe less, I don't know.
No, I don't have that, that in front of me. However, I will follow up with them.
Okay. All right. Hold on, I'm just looking through my notes to make sure I haven't missed one before I go back. Well, I'm going to assume that they've been captured then by. Oh no, wait, there it is. So obviously a number of councillors have raised the questions about parking. And since I am somebody who uses moto and has a cargo bike and bikes, I'm essentially the target audience for this. But I know that I'm a very unusual person in Sydney, like maybe 1 or 2 hands worth of people, possibly. And so from my sense of how Sydney would use this, I would be looking at like adaptability of the site. If I guess what I want to ask is, have you ever encountered a situation where you could actually make a parking garage that was secure for bikes, where vehicle parking spots could be converted to secure parking for bicycles if those people have them, or used for a car? Because it looks like, you know, once you've poured the concrete and you've got a volume, you know, square footage underneath, I don't know that the car parking spot costs that much more than the bike corral that's put in there. Is that something anyone's ever done that might be a little bit more, no?
Well, sorry, I was clearing my, for our, it has been done, because for our own workplace, we had 2 parents that were using their cargo bike to get to work. And so we paid for in our office, paid for a car parking space, and then paid to have a bike rack installed. So that is a gated parkade, and so that was, so there's a there's an example of where that has taken place. In terms of building things to start with so that they could be retrofitted,
It might be a question for,
Yeah.
for Dean.
Yeah.
If
So-
he'd know the relative cost on that.
do you know the relative cost, Dean?
I'm sorry.
If you were to retrofit a parkade space just to, with a rack?
Not a lot. I mean, if
No.
you've got it, if it's currently a
So I'm sorry, can you step to the microphone so that people listening online can hear you?
So the question is, if it is a locker and you want to convert it to a
Yeah, if-
park, or if it's a space and you want to convert it to a locker.
Yeah, so we would tell you know that the cost of the underground parking is really the thing that has made this parking variance come forward. But there's quite a lot of square footage dedicated to bike parking. If that bike parking was actually vehicle parking, could it be set up in such a way that, should those vehicles not appear, people who used bikes could still securely lock their bikes there, because security is an issue? And how much, I guess, part of the cost calculation that went into coming up with the 93 car spaces, how many car spaces would you be able to get if some were, 60% of that bike storage, I don't know, I'm just throwing something out, was actually cars instead? But, if those cars didn't materialize by a miracle, and people put bikes there instead, that would still meet people's needs. Would that cost something substantial?
So first question, it would not cost a lot you would be hilting into a concrete floor, footing for a most likely a cyclone fence enclosure, right? That is roughly 18 feet deep by roughly 9 feet wide, and because you've got the lines, you're not going to interfere with joining if it was just, for example, one. So it's quite feasible to do, and sure, there's probably a cost of doing if you're going to do it that way. It's probably a $5,000 cost to hilty in and put something like that with a gate and opening, something like that, but entirely feasible. To your second question, I think we'd have to take a look, at the current layout relative to making changes to increase, for example, the number of parking stalls, and hence reducing the amount of individual lockers. And then, of course, the lockers not necessarily exact. 2 lockers doesn't necessarily exactly equate to 1 parking stall. So there's a little bit of that would have to be assessed. So I think it's something that could be done, but I'd be hesitant to try to respond to that question right now without someone kind of looking at it in a bit more detail.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I don't think
thank you.
it's-
That's I think as good as you could you could get. Now you can foresee the type of calculations that you probably be asked to do. Thank you. I will go back to Councillor Garnett for a second time.
Thank you, Chair. And the Watt representative is the person. I didn't ask my parking questions in the first round. So in relation to the observations that were taken on, I believe, March 19th and 20th, we had correspondence from people in the area, Galaran and Jean, about the fact that not all Amazon employees park on the Amazon. The contract workers aren't allowed on site apparently until they can actually load their vehicles with their items, and they tend to park in those areas. But based on when you were taking your observations, that would not have been captured, correct?
Correct, because we took our observations when it tends to be the height of resident parking demand, not commercial or employee parking.
And further to those observation dates, were you aware when you were taking those dates that was the first week of spring break?
Yeah, that is spring break.
Yeah, because I'm thinking to myself, I know the area very well, and there's lots of families that live there, and I know if I was to take a car and drive, I'm going to park my on-street car in my parking lot, in my driveway when I'm gone for safety. So that would be something else that might have impacted what you saw in the results. The standard versus small car spaces that staff mentions is in their report, that meets the requirement for overall what's needed, but when you take it in terms of what's provided, it comes up to 43%, I think it is. So I'm wondering, when you do calculations in terms of that, like you're 40 small cars, so like what happens if there's renters, like what happens if there's 70 people that don't have small cars? So then they would have to park on the street, would they not? Like they'd have no other option. They couldn't fit a non-standard or a standard sized car into a small space, correct?
It depends on what your parking management strategy is for the building, which I think you mentioned is still something, yeah.
And I guess the last question I have, when you look at the 21% that provides for less parking based on the TDM measures, would it be fair to say that that's hypothetical or theoretical numbers? Those, I mean, you don't know for sure until people actually start living in the building whether or not that's going to be the case, correct?
So it's hypothetical numbers, but it's based on research in terms of what has actually happened when measures have been put into place, different sites. So it's a work in progress because you keep researching and the things are changing. But based on that, that's the percentage reduction that has been observed to occur.
I guess the reason I asked the question is because we've had some buildings in our downtown that have been approved where there were parking in lieu that was granted or parking variances that were granted, and we subsequently have a waiting list for people for parking, long-term parking and monthly parking in our community, and there are people who live in those buildings. So that is something that I consider when I'm factoring to the numbers you're providing. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I will look again. So Mayor McNeil-Smith appears to have follow-up questions as well.
Yes, thank you. Just one question on the, just to follow up to Councillor Gurnett with regards to the percent of parking reduction and it's data-driven in terms of the data or the research that you provided. Would that data research include, for example, downtown Victoria or downtown Vancouver? I mean, places that are dense and I mean, this is a unique neighborhood. It's got an airport across the street from it. It's got an industrial area across the street on one side. Downtown Victoria in the center is high-rise buildings and has transit service every few minutes, whereas, as was indicated in the Watt report, on most of the transit routes here, it's up to 2 hours between bus stops. So, and just in terms of the data set, it would include areas such as Victoria.
Yes, that data set would include all of those.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering if, although I like the look of the two buildings, I like that, it kind of breaks things up. I like little playgrounds and things in between. But I'm wondering, had you considered just one building? And if so, would that give you more space and allow you to provide the parking
Well,
that's required.
the OCP actually talks about breaking it up into different buildings and
Yeah.
stuff. So we were just going off the OCP, and that's kind of where you start with a development like this. Along with the parking too. I mean, in the OCP that was adopted, it talks about variances will be looked at if a parking demand study was provided, and then we met those measures that was suggested, which we've done. So yeah, we were just going by what the OCP had stated, and that was our guideline, and we feel we've ticked pretty much every box in there and put our best foot forward here.
Okay, thanks for that. So in terms of, I know that, some of my colleagues have kind of touched on this a bit in terms of parking variances that we've provided in the past. Excuse me. And we're getting, it's creating issues. I mean, sometimes when people have bought into a building and they would like to have parking and they can't get it because not enough has been provided in the building. So they go and park out on the street. And there's limited parking on the street, and then we get complaints from other people. So it's quite, so it's a concern in the community generally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that we're gonna get questions about that. And so I think residents would look at this and say, well, developers are required to provide parking for these units. Why are we not insisting on that? It sounds like what's happening is the development is moving the cost maintenance of parking onto the taxpayer. And so how would you respond to people in regards to that? I think the community would want to know, okay, we're letting you off the hook for a significant amount of parking. It's going to put added pressure on our residential area. Yes, a rental housing is needed, but what is, I guess, the justification, or what are they getting out of it in the end? Is any amenities or?
Yeah, well, I would ask the question back to council, why did they adopt a OCP that says that parking variance would be granted if a traffic demand study was done and suggestions from the traffic demand study were implemented? That's what it says in the OCP.
Okay.
That was adopted by this council.
I know we do that, and I guess what, won't get into debate on that, but I think, just having a parking demand study in itself doesn't mean that it mitigates, I think what we'll be looking at, and colleagues have talked about, how it is reflected of Sydney. But thanks for the response.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Relative to the parking, you've indicated there's going to be 136 units on site, and there are 93 parking spots. How will those be assigned? Will there be an additional charge for parking, or will there be units having parking included? How's that going to be determined relative who gets parking, who doesn't? Thank you.
That's something it's a good question, and that will be addressed if this moves forward. Again, it's conversations for the future and discussions for the future for us to have.
So at this point, you've indicated that you're going to have market rental housing, and is that going to, have you given any, you're not indicating whether you've given any indication whether units will include parking or not include parking? So there could be an addition, what I'm supposing is that there could be an additional charge for parking spots. You would have to rent your parking spot.
Not necessarily. It could be come for serve. It could be a rental fee on it. It could, again, we haven't discussed that. We haven't decided yet. We don't know yet what we're going to do there.
Okay. So those that don't have parking in those 93, and if they have additional, we're now going to have to support on street, and as Watt has indicated, could go as far as Skylar, and
I'm just
Well,
sorry, I'm gonna interrupt. I'm not sure if the proponent can answer
Yeah,
that question. They've
it's
kind of
assuming
between
everybody has a
assumed.
car. That, I think you're assuming everybody
Yeah.
would have a car, but if, I'm assuming that they don't all have cars,
Okay, right.
so.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think we've had all of the questions out. I'm sure you'll get to hear a lengthy
Yep.
discussion afterwards.
Thank you.
We'll now look to Ms. Verhagen has the staff report on this. If there is anything at this point now that you would like to add from the staff report, bring to council's attention, please do so.
Excuse me, thank you. Good evening. The application has been presented by the applicant. As you've seen, I won't go over the details. There are a number of variances requested. We've heard at length about the parking variance that's been requested. 2 more minor variances for the stairwells projecting into the side setbacks, being the east and west setbacks. The applicant has indicated the amount of road dedication being required by the town on both the south frontage, being Beacon Avenue frontage, and also the north frontage, being the Jan Place frontage. That tightens up the site north to south and pushes the buildings together. And so the setback variances to the front lot lines, both being the front, the north and the south, are not for the building itself, but for the balconies and little overhangs that project out from the building out into those setback areas. Staff do feel that the building complies very well with a number of policies in the OCP, and that the variances requested are supportable based on the policies in the OCP as is outlined in the staff report. Just going through it, I made a note about the bike parking and the vehicle parking. A question was asked by council about, my understanding was that the question was potentially implying that could the areas shown as bike storage and residential unit storage be built out as vehicle parking and then converted to bike parking in the future if the vehicles don't materialize and the parking demand is very low in the building. So the parking bylaw for Sydney requires class 1 and class 2 bike parking. Class 1 being internal, secure, locked and closed. Class 2 being bike racks outside, hopefully sheltered from the weather, but outdoor bike racks intended more for people arriving at the building by bike, visiting the building. So the applicant is proposing those internal residential units down in the parking level underground as their class 1 bike parking. The bylaw allows that, and as was indicated, they meet the minimum size requirements for bike parking within those residential storage units. So if they were to redesign those storage areas as vehicle parking, that first of all would have to be designed to meet all the dimensional requirements for vehicle parking in terms of maneuvering and turning radius and parking space dimensions. They'd also have to move their class 1 bike parking somewhere else in the building. So that would have an impact on the size and scale of the building above ground if we're converting more of the below ground space to car parking. So something to consider there. I'm happy to answer any questions if council has them. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for answering mine already from the consultant portion of this program. I will look to see if there is anyone who had questions for staff. Okay, Councillor Rintoul, go ahead first.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I seem to recall another project where we had discussion with staff around limiting the tenure in which development must be earmarked as a rental-only property in terms of the number of years. And we heard the applicant indicate this evening that my takeaway was it wouldn't be less than 10 years. The 10 years would be the minimum. Is there a mechanism in this process for council to indicate the number of years, and what would that mechanism be, and how is it monitored or enforced, be it on the title of the property, or what's the procedure for that?
So through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, the 2 applications that I can recall in recent Sydney history when that was considered and discussed was the rezoning application for 2060 White Birch and also the rezoning application for 2180 Beacon. This is not a rezoning application. This is a development permit for the form and character or the look of the building, the 2 buildings, and it's also a variance application. So council could potentially require a covenant on title as a condition of the variance about the length of it being rental housing, but that's not related to the variances at all. I mean, the variances are about the siting of the building and the number of parking spaces. So I'm not sure about the validity of that as a condition of variance, we'd have to look into that, but that would be the tool to do it.
Thank you.
But yeah, just as a reminder, the RM7WS zone that the property is zoned, there's kind of two sets of provisions for amenity contributions in relation to bonus density. So this development would be built out under the first set of regulations in the zoning bylaw. They're set out in the zone as opposed to being in the town's bonus density and community amenity contribution policy that we'd refer to if it was, say, in the regular RM 5, 6, 7 zones, like up the way up 5th Street, 3rd Street, where we've seen other townhouse and condo buildings happening. In this zone, the amenities are built right into the zone. You'll recall that from our zoning bylaw review and bringing that draft bylaw forward earlier this year in 2024. Because this is a different area, there's different amenity rates for this area and different parks contributions requirements, so those would apply. If the developer was proposing a 5 or a 6-story building, that is permitted by the RM7WS zone, and that is where the affordable housing requirement kicks in. That does require 20% of the units to be below market value, but that's not the route that this development application is going. The zone is written to allow the two different routes. So in terms of requiring something on title to restrict it to rental development for longer, yeah, the condition of variance would be the way to go, but I'm not sure if that's a valid thing that can be done given the type of variances that they're requesting here.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Building on that question through you to staff on the pre-zoning thing. So previously, so this was not, it was in the OCP for multifamily, but it was not zoned. And so what you're saying is that if we hadn't pre-zoned it, we would have been in a better position to ask for a longer tenure on the rental term. Am I understanding? No, okay.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
And yeah, the comment that you made previously about that we had to pre-zone it, that I know that was discussed at length many times during the zoning bylaw review about what to do with this neighborhood. So people watching the video might want to go back and review the staff comments that were made at that time about options for the neighborhood and what council's resolutions were there.
Right, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. First, my apologies to the applicant. I asked a question where the answer was clearly in the report, and that was provided. I asked about the location of the secure bike storage, and the staff report says the proposed development meets the requirement for Class 1 bicycle parking through the provision of bicycle parking spaces with 136 adequately sized within 136 adequately sized secure storage units in the underground parkade. My question is actually with regards to small parking spaces, and in the town's off-street parking and loading bylaw, does it set a maximum of small car spaces to the overall car spaces?
Through the chair, yes, it does. I believe it's around 30%. I just have to check in the bylaw for that. Thank you.
So if I recall the percentage correctly, of the 93 parking spaces, 43% are small spaces?
It depends how it's calculated. 29.4%. I'm looking in the staff report on page 5
Yes.
of the staff report, which is page 5 of 68 in the
Yep.
agenda package. The staff, yeah, it says small car parking spaces permitted up to a maximum of 30% of the total number of spaces required, maximum 41 small car parking spaces, and they're providing 40 small car parking spaces. So that meets the bylaw. They're reducing the full-size parking spaces from 136 to 93.
No,
It looks like, yeah, the percentage was taken off the original number required, not the number provided on the site.
And so my question would be is why is it not provided on the number that will be on the site?
I'd have to look at how we interpreted the bylaw for previous developments and to make sure that we're being consistent in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, looking around, seeing no other hands. I had two questions for staff. Given as, you may not have even looked at this yet because it's so early, but I know the applicant suggested that motos would be on the street to share with the neighborhood, which is great. The existing motos that we have in town are hybrids. They don't charge, and so that's easy to do. Since it sounds like motos going towards exclusively EV, that is a considerably different problem to put EV charging. Is there anywhere in potential in this neighborhood where EV charging stations could be placed? You don't know yet.
I'd have to speak with our engineering staff and public works staff, but there is, within the boulevard, there's a potential for installing the electrical system there to put an EV charger out there, and that would be part of the discussion between the applicant and the car share company, whether it's Moto or somebody else. But the other Moto vehicles in Sydney they do park in dedicated on-street parking spaces with the green paint, as was mentioned by a councillor. They may want the same thing in this location. And as far as installing an EV charger on the boulevard for that, I mean, that would be part of the discussions that would come down the road.
Okay, that there's possibly electric facilities on the boulevard, that's good to know.
Yes,
and
that's
perhaps
right.
2180 might have something that they've had to put in nearby, who knows. I guess my second question was, and I wish that I had thought to ask this earlier when you could have looked this up. For the parks, we had our parks acquisition strategy. Is there somewhere nearby here that had already been flagged as a parks acquisition that this would potentially contribute to?
So in the schedule of the OCP, the official community plan that is the West Side Local Area Plan, there are some general drawings that show parkland within the neighborhood zoned for mixed-use village, just north of here. So central in the neighborhood is where we are looking to add park space. It doesn't have specific addresses earmarked, but center of the neighborhood here is where we're looking to get property for parkland.
It wouldn't be, say, adjacent to the existing Swiftsure, which I think has monkey bars and swings and a slide. But it would be something that would come up as a new site redeveloped and opened up, or do we have green space?
It would depend on future council decision about how to spend the money acquired for parkland acquisition in terms of what area of Sydney to purchase that land first and whether to add it onto an existing site or start purchasing in a new location. I believe that's kind of the next step of that parkland acquisition study, is to develop the strategy for that.
Okay, thank you. So I guess that just, it wouldn't necessarily be in this neighborhood. That's not how we set it up. I'm sorry, I wish I'd thought to look at that sooner. All right, thanks. Seeing no further questions for staff, I will look for a motion then to begin discussion. I guess we'll ask for the recommendations to be moved individually, because I suppose if one doesn't pass, two wouldn't go. Is that moved by Councillor Rintoul?
No, I'm just asking for the floor.
You're asking for the floor. Go ahead.
I'll move the recommendation for discussion that development permit application number DP 100847 and development variance permit application number DB 100359 at 2114 Beacon Avenue West be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Okay, have that moved. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second for discussion.
Thank you. I will let the mover go. If you have any motivation, comments you would like to.
Yeah, thank you. I think, clearly I have concerns, in particular on variance. I expressed them to the applicant. Be that as it may, part of our process is referral to our Advisory Planning Commission, who a body of residents to review this through perhaps a slightly different lens than we did tonight, a more encompassing lens. And so with that in mind, I think it's fair to get their feedback their recommendations on this that may well help the developer if there are suggestions in there to be altered, to be changed, the recommendations to be made to help make this perhaps in their mind a better project for the town. So I'm comfortable with giving them the opportunity to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I've been sitting on the fence in terms of my consideration of whether to forward to APC. I think I've certainly considered the benefit or the importance to referring it to APC in terms of APC being a citizen-appointed body with the intention of providing feedback as a group of residents on applications that come forward. However, countering that is the concerns. I first of all appreciate that that a development for this a multi-unit, much higher density application has come forward for this property. Has to be one of the most underused pieces of single-family residence property in the community for the last 70 years or so. But in part, while we are considering an application for this particular property, we know the intent of the West Side Local Area Plan within the OCP. And when we repeatedly look at the very first slide, which is the aerial of the neighborhood up to Skylark, it's not the entire neighborhood, but it's the neighborhood up to Skylark. And when we know the density that we've approved in the zoning bylaw, in the new zoning bylaw, 141 units are going to be, 4 or 5 houses over to the east on 2 acres in 5 stories. There are, looking at the map, 48 other residences on Beacon Avenue West, on both sides of Jean Place and the one side of Scarlet Place. Yes, today that doesn't generate very much. Those 48 single-family residences don't generate a lot of on-street parking. Hence the calculation in the watt that it is relatively low used. I think we wisely, the town wisely, in West Lap, knowing the density that we have zoned, increased density we have zoned, and the density does differ between Beacon Avenue West and Jean Place, and from Jean Place inwards in that neighborhood. We appreciate that the current residential streets of Jean Place and Skylark are narrow in terms of having if there are 136 units, currently the density in Sydney is approximately 2 people per residence. So you have 272 people living there. And the ones that are using vehicles, they're going to be using the access and egress is off the narrow Jean Place. And hence we do have the right-of-way dedication that we've requested. We can't immediately create a wider roadway because this is one property in an entire block. But we have to think down the road in terms of 2180 is 5 stories and 141 units. This is 4 stories and 136 units. There's room for 2 or 3 more of these in that same line between Beacon Avenue West and Jean Place. And what is that going to create in terms of traffic, the narrow street, and on-street parking? So, yes, we're charged with considering this application within the current within our current bylaws, but we do, I think, need to be mindful of the long-term changes that we're looking to see in the neighborhood. Pleased to see that there's a higher proportion of 3-bedroom units in this particular project than perhaps any project we've seen, certainly in the last 6 years, but for quite some time. And I think that's an indication that the proponent is aware of the housing needs, the workforce housing in our community. We have the unfortunate situation where we create, as council, staff recommend to council, we create policy to create conditions for workforce housing. But the reality is we can't control who buys the 3-bedroom unit. And what parking that may or may not create. So if three individuals purchase this and they're all working in, to rent one 3-bedroom unit and they work in West Sydney, yes, they may be able to walk to work, but they will go elsewhere, not just in Sydney, but they'll go elsewhere in the region. And are they likely to use transit? If you have a 4-member or 5-member family, where the children are involved in different sports or different recreation activities, is there only one car for that family, or is there 2 cars for that family? I think we all know families who have 2 or 3 kids involved in sports, and they have 2 cars to get people around. So yes, it is certainly attractive in terms of being very, very close to the west side industrial area, and is encouraging for workforce housing, but we don't ultimately control the individuals that will move into that space, or precisely what the parking demand will be. This is the highest parking variance on a percentage basis that I can recall. Whether or not it is the highest, it is very high. And while I appreciate the proponent engaging Watt to bring data, to bring research to this project, or to the application, a concern I have is that the data includes places like downtown Victoria or downtown Vancouver, where circumstances, quite frankly, are different. And to Watt's credit, in the report, it presents the 7 or 9 traffic routes, but it does indicate the majority of them, have up to 2-hour waits, for transit service. I appreciate the second recommendation is to request information from transit, but that's a lot different than actually having significantly better transit service on the west side. So, and the last comment, or 2 more comments I'll make, is with regards to the language in the letter of rationale and the use of hardship. I'm not getting into a technical definition of hardship, but reference is made to giving the 2.5 meters and 2 meter right-of-ways on the north and the south side. That's understood. There's currently a single-family residence there, and we're looking at going to 136 units. This is significant increase in densification. And while it may be a hardship that those right-of-ways are being taken, it was known in terms of going into the design of the application, and it's the reverse of hardship that is created when you're permitting density to 136 units or higher on that property. So I appreciate that council has used the language of wanting to see hardship with variances come forward. I do not agree that the town requesting those 2.5 and 2 meter right-of-ways are creating a hardship, given the density that is provided on the property. The last I'll say, and it may be considered minor because these drawings are supposed to be representations, but the more accurate the representation, I think the more informed we are, and quite frankly the public is, when they see developments, because the public is going to weigh on this because it is a significant change for our community. Council is fully supportive, as we've done in the OCP and as we've done in our zoning bylaw, to densify, particularly for workforce housing. But we are trying to find the balance for livable communities. And so I would just suggest, I'm not asking, the council can't impose, but I would suggest or recommend that the applicant consider the presentation of this project when it's presenting to APC, did a Google of Google Maps, and the traffic circle is there in Google Maps. So I think they're a better reflection of the project, whether it's the aerial or whether it's the frontages can be provided. I'll leave my comments there for now.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I won't support the motion at this time. While I recognize it's our process to go to APC and get some feedback, that's a good thing. In this case, the parking is the variance to me is significant. So I think that there needs to be some reworking of the plans, and I'd rather give the developer that message now, rather than dragging out the process to go back and look at coming up with something different. In regards to comments about, if it was our intent to, our OCP says that we would consider parking variances if transportation demand studies and parking studies were required. Why aren't we happy with this? Yeah, it's true that we'll consider these things. However, I did not find the parking study or the transportation demand study compelling enough for me to agree to those sorts of variances. As I mentioned in my comments earlier, there seemed to be not a complete understanding, perhaps, of the things that are unique about our community. And as previously mentioned, studies that are based on Victoria or Vancouver, although the Vancouver, it was mentioned that they were based on studies in suburban areas of Vancouver, comparable to Sydney. Well, I know Vancouver really well, grew up there, spent a lot of time there. I can't think of any place there that is similar to Sydney. Vancouver has a significant transit system. Just about every area in the Vancouver area has got some access to SkyTrain routes all over the place, a very robust transit bus network, so it's really not comparable. Also, in terms, I also realized the comments made about the density in the future that's planned for that area. That's a factor for me as well. And, yes, there's transit is available, but not very frequently. And there is a study, but that's a 25-year study. So maybe 25 years from now, there might be better transit, but that's not the case now or in the near future. Yeah, passing, I see this as kind of, passing the obligation for the cost and maintenance of parking onto the town and the taxpayers. So I'm uncomfortable with that. And while, yes, it's true, we need workforce housing, we also need to pay attention, as the mayor said, to the livability of our communities. And I'm concerned about making sure we have safe streets that are wide enough. I'm feeling not supportive of this at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Like the mayor, I'm not 100% sure. I appreciate what Councillor Rintoul has spoken to. It's important to get have our APC weigh in. The concerns are similar for everybody, I guess, that's spoken so far in terms of the parking variance, because although the OCP speaks to traffic demand management studies and parking variances, there's a parking variance and then there's a parking variance. And I think that's the distinction here. It's one thing to ask for a parking variance of 10 to 15 cars, but 43 is quite a lot. That's a big ask. It's not, the letter of rationale speaks to a minor, and it's not minor, it's major. knowing the context of our community, and that's where I really struggle. And staff makes a really excellent point about future developments in this area, what 2180 might even impact. They provided adequate parking plus, but as other people have spoken to here, if these are family units, people having had small children at one time, yeah, you need more than one car to get your kids around, and there has been a reference made to Highway 17 and the pedestrian flasher in the report. The fact is that people don't like going across that intersection. They don't feel safe. And so they'll go out of their way to not do that. They'll take a car because they just don't feel safe. And then, until such time as a pedestrian overpass is addressed, hopefully fairly soon, this becomes an issue. And so people will take their cars to go into Sydney just for that reason alone. I know people that do that specifically, just for the fear of crossing there and walking across and feeling at risk. It's a big ask. I also struggle with, I know it's not something that's spoken to before we can dictate, but the 10-year term is an issue for me. Goes by like that. It would be much easier for me to accommodate the aspect of this ask if there was an affordability component, because then I can relate the rationale around affordability and not having a vehicle. But if people can afford to pay market rents, generally they will have cars, and maybe in the presenter's experience that's not like that. But I have 2 sons, and one of them has a partner. They each have a car. In fact, all of their friends have cars, so that demographic has cars. I know that firsthand. And so when you look at this proposal, there's actually 226 bedrooms, and yes, some will probably be with children. I just have a hard time believing that the data-driven report in here is going to speak to the actual cars that we're going to see in this development. And then with the greater percentage of small car spots, I mean, yeah, a lot of people drive small cars, but a lot of people drive standard-sized cars. And if those cars don't have spaces, they're going on the street. And this area, the Galaran neighborhood, is going to go through a lot in this transition. They've already been through a lot with what's gone on over there. And I worry about what future developments will do to this neighborhood and how it's going to impact the people that live there now, not just the people in the future. And we don't have sidewalks in that neighborhood, and that's also an issue. So the more cars you're putting on the street, the more often people are going to have to walk around the cars into the street, and it becomes a safety issue. So as I said, I haven't decided yet. I'm hoping others will weigh in on their decisions now. For me, it's about balancing this overwhelming need for workforce housing in the community with the impact, the potential negative impact, very real potential negative impact on the Galaran neighborhood as we transition. But also the fact that I think it is important to garner APC's input, given that they have professional expertise that I do not have. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be supporting this motion going forward to APC. I don't think it's ready for APC yet. And a couple of specifics to that. I think, as been pointed out by my colleagues, I think we need a more realistic representation of the location and the site map. That, as the mayor's indicated, Google Maps now shows the roundabout and all the street accesses. So I think it's important that representation is there, as well as the approved developments that are already in place, the 141 units to the east and the hotel to the south east. I think those are important to show there, to give especially if it goes to APC, to at some point to give them an idea of what does exist there, because that's what they're basing their decisions on, as well as the road dedications and not just showing what's inside the property lines, not what's outside the property lines, because that is yet to be determined. So that's the first point. I think we just need something a little bit more realizable for APC to start evaluating. And like my colleagues, I have a concern about the parking. A 30% decrease in the parking for that application is considerable. And if we, as the mayor's pointed out, if we take 2 people per unit, that's about 270 people living in that location. We are a market destination town. Everybody has a car. I mean, we're not at the point where you can transit's not at the supply level where we can not have a car. So if you take 90 cars, 90 people are not going to have cars because you're taking 30% of the parking away. That's a lot, and I'm concerned about how those people are moving around, given the current transit supply to that area, as well as crossing the highway for any needs, as Councillor Garnett pointed out. The hesitation comes there. So again, I won't be supporting this motion going forward to APC. I don't think we're ready yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Novak, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to be very long because most of my colleagues have echoed most of my sentiments on this. My two big issues are, number one, the parking. As has been previously mentioned, I found it very convenient that the parking study recommended 93 parking spaces, which is what the applicant built into his project. And I just don't feel that parking study is convincing enough for me to accept it as gospel. I think it's too much of a variance. I worry about on-street parking in the area with two large projects, and as the mayor suggested, perhaps more to come. I think at a very minimum there should be a 1-to-1 parking ratio, but that's for another discussion. I'm also concerned about the 10-year rental. Again, I feel as though, and I hate to use this term, but it might be paying lip service to the question of affordable rentals in Sydney. There's no question we need rentals. There's no question we need workforce housing, but 10 years is barely the tip of the iceberg. So for those reasons, I feel that this should go back to the applicant before it goes forward to APC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will take my turn. First, I'll start with the things that I'd liked about this application. I think, I mean, I guess I'll start with first things first. Like my colleagues who think this is not ready for APC, I concur. I won't support it moving on. I like, and it hasn't anything to do even with the variances, except for the parking, which is the unfortunate part. The variances for the setbacks, because they were for articulations and stairwells, those to me weren't the big deal, because I feel setbacks are more about the why than the letter of it, and it's about massing next to your neighbors, and it's about viewscape and sound for the people inside the building, and articulations and stairwells I feel don't have the same impact, and I'd be okay with that. And there's quite a bit of right of way. I'm okay with that. The parking variance is too much, and I know that the applicant kind of followed the directions and came up with a study that gave the rationale. However, it involves a big if in the transportation demand management, which requires the participation to a large extent of BC Transit. And without BC Transit actually coming through with something confirmed, it would be a big deal. And having them as a partner, you can't guarantee that, and they're big and they're slow. So that's a big problem. And the other thing is simply that parking is probably the single most heated topic almost that we get letters about in council. And the second, of course, would be affordable housing. And so to have this come together would mean that when council had to look at this application and whether to approve it in the town's best interest and whether it was meeting these variances, I suspect the stack of letters we would get would be forcing council to think, I think that the town doesn't want this and we can't support the variance, both on these technical rationales for specific aspects of this neighborhood that Councillor O'Keefe already mentioned, because of that highway and geometry of that site. It's not even as walkable or bikeable even as Sydney, unfortunately. So I think that's just where we would have to go. And I know some of the comments about the massing of the site in 2 buildings versus 1 probably made Mr. Strong with Arm age a day after the Beacon West thing, where he was, the number 1 comment he was given was, why don't you break it apart and reduce the massing? And then this time we said, why don't you squish them together? So again, I understand for applicants, this must be a Byzantine process, which feels somewhat like a coin toss sometimes, and what you're going to get from Sydney. It was mentioned by the mayor originally as well that this is probably the most underutilized site in all of Sydney in terms of green space, and the park allotment was something that came up because that was some of the money that went forward. And this site here is essentially green space that could have potentially been, even though we have no formal, and this can't be taken as any, formal statement of Sydney having a policy about this in our parklands acquisition strategy. We've never gone this far, but when I look at what building park space costs, and how that would come to, this looks like we actually have a greenfield site, which would be the place that, as this neighborhood densified, it would come from, like, this would be the key site to bring it from. Though the value of the land due to the zoning is so very high. And so I do worry about having this be developed as the first site to that high densification. We might right off the bat lose the one site that we had the green space ability to have a park. And that concerns me in the order of our planning, which is not the applicant's problem again, but as council, when we're looking at what's overall best for the town and the community, is something I have to take into account, or at least have the proponent have maybe a better sense of when they come forward to APC. The 10-year rental has come up, and you were asked if they would be stratified, and the answer was no, which suggests that that would not be a strong plan to then convert to condo, because normally when people were really intending to rent for a while and then convert to condo, they usually came to us and said, yes, we're going to pre-stratify because we intend to do that. Without that pre-stratification, I think it's harder to do later. We've had large discussions about that for other applications. So to me, this simply sounds like the applicant still has some haziness around questions that is going to make the public have more questions for us. This to me looks like it would be market rental, and it would be difficult to convert later, and it would stay market rental. But by introducing the 10-year timeline, it muddied the water in a way that would be potentially counterproductive. I feel bad though, because I will impersonate someone who's under 40. I'm 42, but I don't have a car. I have a cargo bike and I have bikes. My kids are in activities, and so for me, being obviously the target workforce demographic, works in light manufacturing, has a spouse in the service industry, this would be my jam. However, it does include a lot of things that I would say probably 99% of Sydney will say people can't do that. And I know people can, because I think I'm a people and I do it. I face this essentially every day about my lifestyle. However, knowing the way other people have expectations for their lifestyles, to design a building from the get-go in a way that I know will require other people to accept a lifestyle that's radically at odds with what their surrounding community expects from a livable lifestyle and defines as the type of, as a lifestyle for the average person, is a livability issue. To say our market rental people are just going to have to accept a lower standard of living is, I suppose, not something we can go in off the bat. I know it's possible. I exist, but they won't. And I know we talked about marketing for who it would come to, for who it would go to, and we have talked about this for other applications, so I do think it's relevant that the idea of how it would be advertised comes up and how it would go to workforce people in Sydney rather than, say, being shown through a realty agency that pops up in Alberta or Ontario as, please move to Sydney, it's a great destination place to move your building and then bring your whole family. Because we do hear from the businesses that are already here about how badly they need housing for the families that already work here. So advertising anything as something that is a better destination, especially when you have copy that already exists that shows that the 3 bedrooms that are in the existing condominiums that you're selling aren't going to families, and that's part of the selling point, is not going to work in the favor of leading the general public to believe that this is intended for workforce housing. I would suggest, in addition to Sydney's housing needs assessment report, which suggests what the market rental rates and our deficits for the types of rental before it comes back again and how this will meet that need, the applicant also read their ad on page 17 of Seaside Magazine so that they see what the public will see when they hear about these. This neighborhood context perspective is in that ad. I think they should also know that people who watch these videos and write to council have been gentrified out of Sydney. Some of them live in their cars, some live in hotels, some live in other locations, which are not housing. That was not a good foot to step out on. And I'll leave that there. So the mayor has further comment? Otherwise I was going to simply call the question. You have a further comment?
Thank you, Chair. I have 4 things, I think, and the first is actually a question. It begins with a question through to staff. And that is my understanding that if an applicant does not stratify within a relatively short period of time, relative to the application or approval of the application, then a request for strating actually comes to council. Could staff respond to that, please?
Yeah. So through the chair, if a building is not stratified within 6 months of receiving an occupancy permit, then it has to go through a subdivision process to stratify a previously occupied building. It is important to note that the town doesn't give approval to buildings being stratified that are under construction. That's not something that the approving officer for the town reviews or approves. When it's a new build under construction, we just receive a registered strata plan that shows us what has been registered at land titles. So sometimes buildings are stratified during construction and sometimes they are not. So, thank you.
So just to clarify through you, Chair, so if 6 months past occupancy permit did lapse, then the process would include a process to come to council?
If the building has been constructed and given occupancy and still no strata plan was registered at land titles, then in the future, if the property owner wanted to stratify those rental units and turn them into individual real estate entities through the strata plan, then they'd have to apply for a subdivision and go through the subdivision process to stratify that building that had already been occupied.
Sorry, just one more time for clarification.
So nothing had lapsed there.
Does that subdivision process include coming to council?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. My second point is that I meant to make during my first remarks was that one of the considerations for me, and I'm sure for council, is that given there will be other high density projects in this immediate neighborhood, we are in fact setting a precedent with regards to variances, whether they be setbacks or whether they be parking. The second is, and this is a question through to staff as well, if this motion does not pass, council has the option to pass a further motion in terms of what it would like the proponent to bring back again, and it could be as specific or not as it wishes, or it's not obligated to make a further recommendation to the proponent. We've certainly communicated, I think, through our deliberation, but could staff speak to what motions arising might include, and then I'll have a comment to make.
Sure, yes, through the chair. Again, if this current motion to forward the applications to the Advisory Planning Commission doesn't pass, then it would be staff's recommendation that council make a subsequent motion to direct the applicant what to do with this application, whether it's to redesign, whether council wants to deny the application, whether they want to redesign based on certain criteria, just to give some direction. If you don't do that, then it's kind of left hanging and we don't know what is happening next with this application. There is a second staff recommendation in the report as well.
Thank you. So my further comment is that while council has received the presentation for the first time, has had a Q&A with the applicant and with staff, and we've heard each other's deliberation, I'm not sure that if this motion does not pass, that we would be prepared this evening to actually indicate specifics to the applicant to what we would like to see. I'll just leave that for my colleagues, but to the applicant, I just want to indicate process in terms of we're meeting as committee this evening, we're passing a recommendation or not, and that will go forward to council meeting next week. I sense that given our deliberation and comments were made, while we certainly asked a number of questions, the applicant might wish to address some of the remarks made by council members, and you would have an opportunity to do that during public participation for 4 minutes at our council meeting next week. So I just wanted to indicate the process for council, both for council that this is coming back to us next week in terms of what we might consider at that meeting, and that the applicant could speak at that meeting as well. I'm leaning to, given all the discussion that I've heard, I'm leaning to recommending it to go to APC. I think there could be some input from APC that might help us if we were not supportive of the application. Indication of what we might actually recommend the applicant consider in revising the application if it were not to go forward. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further comment. I think the mayor's perspective on the idea of collecting APC's comments on what to recommend to the applicant.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
If I might interject, I don't want to presume for a moment that the APC is going to go one way or another. We shouldn't do that, and I don't want to indicate that. I'm just saying that as a part of what could be process, that could be a part of the process. So I'm not making any assumptions with regards to, or presumptions with regards to APC's consideration of this applicant's project.
Okay, I'll call the vote then and let it go to APC if it does and if it doesn't. All right, I'll call the question. All in favor of forwarding the application on to APC? Okay, that's 3 opposed, or all 3 in favor. Call all opposed. So that's Councillor O'Keefe, myself, Councillor Duck, Councillor Novak. Motion fails. I think because of the, I'm sorry, the
Point of privilege,
Yeah, go
Sure.
ahead.
If we could perhaps question through to staff, the relevance now of, well, I don't believe there is a relevance for the second recommendation.
And that was what I was considering, was whether or not, because we do have ongoing talks with BC Transit about various things, whether this application and the type of calculations that they have already done would be useful to forward to BC Transit at this point. And I guess maybe I'll just ask staff whether they think that would be useful for anything that's going on.
Again, to the chair, it would depend, I guess, the second staff recommendation about sending this on to BC Transit for comment would really depend on what council's next steps are with this application, but I will defer to Mr. Nelson if he has additional comments. Sorry, Mr. Edwards.
No additional comments.
Okay, I'll assume it's not relevant at this time, and that if it is relevant, if there's we see the application again in some revised form, that it may be relevant at that time.
Point of order, Chair. Given that the motion failed to refer, I don't know whether there will be a subsequent motion arising, but will this come back to, will this go to council in terms of the motion not passing?
I'm actually not sure about that on process, if we need a motion arising. Perhaps, Mr. Edwards, do we need to?
Well, as indicated earlier, it is an option for the committee to put forward an additional motion for council's consideration that may help indicate direction to the applicant, considering that the motion failed.
Sorry, maybe I'll provide a little more clarity. If there were no motion, if there was not a motion arising, which then would then be forwarded to, because this is committee of the whole, the recommendation and the vote would have to be, even though it was not approved, would still have to go forward for a vote at council meeting next week.
Correct. But that doesn't preclude the ability for committee to make an additional recommendation to council.
Do we need a special motion for this to come forward to council?
No.
Okay. So the state of this application is that committee of the whole recommends the recommendation that it goes to APC be denied, and it will come to our next council meeting.
Correct.
For council to review again. Okay. And at that point, the applicant can try to address any concerns. It's potential that at that point, council could overrule committee of the whole and forward it on to APC.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarification, I think, for everyone. We have no other staff reports or other business, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. I don't think we need to vote on that. We are adjourned. Thank you.